How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the Legions Lounge. I'm your host, Matt, and I'm joined by CEO of Future Lore Studios and creator of Legions Realms at War, Taylor. How's it going tonight?
It's going good, man. It's good to always be back and doing another episode. Everything's kind of calmed down a little bit after Gen Con, and we've been able to hammer out a podcast. And, we have another new member of the community on tonight. I think that's, I always say tonight, but I mean, that's when we record. We listen to you guys. You guys listen to us in the morning, but, it's great to have another member of the community on, one of our relatively new players. And someone who's joined us in and has already found some really early success in the game. So we want to welcome Thomas onto the podcast for the first time. People probably know him as Alien Kiwi in the Discord server. And I know that we learned a lot from what he's done, particularly with the new Angel deck out of Empires. I know that we saw a lot of success with his deck list at this past Gen Con. And a lot of the new players really enjoyed playing it, and it makes sense. It's coming from a new player himself. So, Thomas, welcome.
Hi, yeah, thanks for the introduction and the kind words. I'm always happy about the Gen Con thing when you mentioned it. It's I think one of the coolest things I've had in a card game was learning that you took my deck list to the event to show off to new players. It's a really sweet thing to find out about. But yeah, no, thanks for inviting me onto the podcast. I'm definitely new to that experience, so I'm excited to see how it goes.
Yeah, no worries at all. So let's quickly talk about Gen Con here. So you did pull a lot of the deck lists from the community, right? So,
yeah, we did. So I last year we had some good experience with London Comic Con and Fan Expo, both here in Canada. And we used some basic deck lists that I built these based off the starter decks, added some cards from each of the sets, and built a more constructed version of the starter decks to try and showcase to people at those two conventions specifically. And it worked really well. So my plan and intention was to bring those decks again, and then obviously with some Empires updates as well as some new decks as well. But little do we know the sheer amount of mass preparation that goes into Gen Con. We were prepping for about 3 months. Oh, wow. And I was up to down to like the night before, and I was still trying to get deck lists together and trying to figure it out. And so I reached out to both Ryan and Hunter in our community, who was coming with us the following day down to Indianapolis. And both of them were staying at the same place for ease of pickup and drop off. And they, of course, had their card pools with them. So I reached out to them and say, hey, can you guys offer a little bit of support and help some deck builds? And, I brought 5 decks myself, but little did I know that I was just basically asking for them to, get the other 3. So we at least had 1 of each Legion. And they went ahead and built 9 decks. They pooled some of the resources of theirs as well as pulling and drawing from the community. And Thomas's deck list was the one that they pulled for Castiel, the Tears of the Lost Messiah, the new Angel Warlord. And it just so happened to be obviously a tournament winning and very streamlined deck. So we didn't necessarily start off a whole lot of new players on that deck, but as the weekend went on and we had people return to the booth, more and more people that were interested in trying to learn more competitive style decks. So then we gave them that deck to pilot, and they definitely had a lot of fun. And as a result, we netted a bunch of great American players to our game. And I don't think we could have done that without Thomas's excellent tournament-ready deck list. So
I do appreciate the description as tournament-ready. I hope so. That is the plan. I'm excited for the upcoming competitive events, and I am planning to take Castile to those events to see how it goes. It's been really fun, like building the deck and tuning it. It's been a really interesting experience. I've played Hearthstone and Magic before, and it's really interesting coming into a game that doesn't quite have as established of a meta. Where in Hearthstone and Magic, there's so many players, tons of online resources where decks very quickly get sort of built and refined, and it's very interesting playing a smaller card game that's growing and where deck lists aren't as immediately uniform. So it's been a very new and a very enjoyable like deck building experience that I've had a ton of fun with so far. It's been also really cool seeing other people build Castile in different ways in their deck lists.
No, exactly. I mean, we have you and I have slightly different Lost Messiah builds and different
Yeah,
if you call them techs, is what we'd use.
yeah,
Me personally, I like Oath of the Lost Messiah, whereas you only like it at one.
yeah. It's a very different mindsets with like the deck building where I'm trying to use Oath very exclusively as this setup piece to set up a toolbox engine of Imperial Empire on turn one, whereas you are looking towards the mill and burn
Activation
aspect of
effect.
it, which I'm
Exactly.
very curious to see how that turns out. Very curious to see how the list works out. Jacob, who I'm pretty sure has been on the podcast before too,
Mhm.
has his build of it with an engine based on Seraphim cards, and then Destiny Dust, I believe. Destiny Dust to pierce your veil on turn one to try to OTK, which is also a really interesting use of the Warlord, and it's super exciting seeing like a deck evolve and build and like evolving on it in time. So I've been having
Exactly.
it's been really cool seeing that happen.
No, it's been amazing.
Mhm.
I felt the exact same way, especially with the deck that I've been mainly piloting, which is currently Alehouse.
Mhm.
I've been building a couple other things here and there, but I've I typically always bounce between decks. I'll have a deck that I mainly play, and then I'll have a deck that I bounce back to. Now, the deck that I bounce back to in this is Ethelheim. It's a deck that I'm always constantly refining. Where what even was my bounce back deck from Frontiers before, Taylor? Do you have an idea? I'm kind of blanking here.
You basically, I mean, you bounce around to a few. I know that you mainly stuck with Burnforge specifically, the
Yeah.
variant version of the Blastforge Dwarf deck. So I mean, you've been on dwarfs for a while now, Matt. So
Oh yeah.
I think you found your legion that suits your playstyle.
Oh yeah. It's very sciency is the easiest way to describe it, right? It's something that's needs to be very calculated, and it's not just
Mhm.
a simple like, oh, turnkey, do this, I win. It the in my opinion, the wins feel a lot more rewarding in a way, but it's
Mhm.
Ethelheim is very fun. It's a very unique way of playing an aggro deck. It feels like it's playstyle wise, it feels like it's boars, like Sharn boars, mixed with frost control. I don't know how to explain that. It's this like aggro oppressive control that's really fun to play.
So what you're saying is that coming out of Empires, and both you guys piloting mainly Empire Warlords now, that research and development team and design and everything, we did our job to provide you guys with the necessary tools to not only push the game into a new territory, a new forward direction, but also give you guys some really good variety. And like you're talking about Cassio, being able to build it multiple different ways. So I think Empires overall was a success in that regard.
Oh yeah, Empires was a
Oh yeah.
huge success. I find it to be amazing. I want to say easily over doubled the amount of playable decks that you could have. Right? Like I mean,
Mhm.
one could argue that like Lost Messiah was playable with air quotes from Ravaged Lands and Frontiers, but like it makes actually the deck. It makes 8 more decks, 9 with Marianas if you were part of the Kickstarter.
Mhm.
Competitive, and actually I don't want to say like more streamlined, less janky feeling. It had a very enjoyable feel to it.
Yeah, no, I think Empires has been really sweet so far. I think all of the new decks are super interesting. The new Warlords are all super cool in the new way that they sort of pull their legions. Um, I've been like looking at other decks and trying out other decks, and I haven't quite bit the bullet on going for some of them, but like dragons look super sweet. I like how it's a different way to use the same style of, token sacrifice and creation that Mythic Beast likes to do. Esselheim, as you were mentioning, is a really interesting deck.
Really
It's
fun.
it's a hard one to beat, and it's a hard one to figure out how to beat from the Castile perspective. So it's certainly a really sweet deck that's very interesting to try to play around and build around.
No, of course.
It's got some.
Sorry, I feel with Angels, it's very, that's just kind of a matchup you just kind of push to the side. Like it's not,
Mhm.
it's a very difficult matchup for you since it's Angels relies on having a board state, Dwarves relies on ripping apart their board state, but not in like a destruction way, which is what Angels has prevention for since they need that board state. It has more of just a
The shuffle effect.
the shuffle effects, the bounce effects, like the
Yeah.
deviant ways, like the
I think that what you're trying to get at there, Matt, is for those listening that don't know exactly the in-depth what we're talking about here is that Angels, both Castile's aggressive way and Michael's heavily defensive way, both of which rely on what we call holy counters in the game, which is a built-in protection. Michael uses them for alternate resource to remove them to negate or cancel or destroy things. Castile uses them as built-in protection long enough for him to be able to proc his ability that allows him to remove the counters to deal effect burn damage. So two very different ways of playing, both utilizing the same resource that is a resource that only Angels have access to.
exactly.
Now, where other legions, Angels have seen some problematic issues or problems against demons in tournament play because demons it can steal your cards with holy counters on them or rip apart your hand, which really hurts the Angels' consistency or progression through the game. But outside of that, Angels have had a really great matchup against the heavily aggro decks because you can cancel or deny things. They've had great matchups versus decks like Mythical Beasts that like to use removal but through destruction purposes because the holy counters are built-in shields to destruction. But Dwarves is particularly the Angels' kryptonite because what you are getting at, Matt, is not necessarily destruction, but it is non-destruction removal, right? So Dwarves are a very tempo-based shuffle cards back bounce. They're ultimately a disruption deck, right? And Angels do not deal or fare well against disruption.
Exactly. So it's that I feel like that's one of those matchups in Castiel that you can't just like, you kind of have to just chalk it up, right? It's most of the time I feel most of the time it's just a difficult matchup, right? It's most of the time if it's built properly, it's favored in Ethelheim's favor, or Quartzheart, or whichever dwarf or Lord is being played. But there's also, to be fair, Castiel does have a lot of effective matchups as well, right? So in things that rely on destroy, like what's a deck that relies on destroy? I'm blanking off the top of my head.
Mythic Beasts.
Solara, yeah.
And Dragons.
And like Castiel would have a difficult time for that because they're not like the holy counters prevent that destruction. So it's very much a give and take, complicated rock paper scissors kind of matchup way.
It's definitely, I've played in competitive card games, and I'm certainly not unfamiliar with having more variable matches.
Yeah,
That's kind of one thing I do like about the deck, though, is that it does have some swingy matchups where it's almost kind of a gamble in that, I'm choosing a deck that inherently has some matchups that are going to be much more difficult, but I'm also getting a lot of matchups that are very favored in my direction, so it's definitely a bit of a gamble and a risk in deck selection, but it's one I'm hopeful will pay off. But even so, it doesn't hurt to better learn the bad matchups and to get experience in any way.
No,
and
not
that's
at
been
all.
that's been one of the fun things about Empires, is even if I'm not getting to pilot all 9 warlords just yet. It's still been really fun to see the decks all, see them all do their thing, see how they play, see how to play against them. And as a newer player who's very interested in the competitive scene and jumping right into that, it's definitely been fun trying to catch up and figure out how all of this stuff works, how all the different archetypes function, how all the decks, how do they win, how do they lose, what cards are important, what cards should I disrupt, what things do I maybe not need to worry about in a certain matchup, what things do I need to worry about. And so it's been a really fun experience to, immediately get hands-on and to really learn the, how all the decks interact in that.
Oh, exactly. Taylor, I have this is just a random question. If you don't feel like answering, that is okay. In Empires, there was a card for heroes. I forget the exact name. It was a hero card that let you destroy your own cards as if it was an opponent's card.
Betrayal from Within.
Yeah.
Betrayal from Within. Do you think that's a possibility for other legions?
Well, actually, yeah, it's funny about that, Matt. Betrayal from Within was a very unique card design. It was a design space that we've been exploring for a little while. It was actually there was further a little peer into the discussion, the development of cards for legions, but it was a card that not necessarily the card itself, but the mechanics of it was pulled from a set in the future, and we pulled it forward to see how it not only fit with the way that the theme and what heroes were doing at the time in Empires, but it was also a mechanic that we wanted a little bit of experiment with to see one, if necessarily the game was ready for a mechanic like that, but also just see how it interacted with everything. And I think with the cards that came alongside heroes in Empires, cards like Darkwood Archers of Evergreen, Peer into the Darkwood, and cards that heroes already had, like Glinting Lance of Xeon, cards that have effects by being removed from the field by opposing players' card effects specifically. Heroes often do not have a lot of removal in terms of board clearing removal, like we were just previously discussing with some other legions. So giving heroes a card that not only could remove 2 cards on the field, but also had the ability to remove your own cards and they count as if they were removed from your opponents. It's a really interesting design space, and it allowed heroes to do things that other legions didn't really have access to, while still simultaneously accomplishing the same goal. So it's a really unique style, and it's something that we're overall very, very happy with how Betrayal from Within specifically works. Maybe that's just because of the hero interactions that hero cards have. So it is definitely something, like I said, it was pulled from future design. So it's definitely something that we're going to experiment with further, since we've seen success with Betrayal from Within. So to long and short of it, Matt, yes, to answer your question, is we definitely are going to, you'll see that kind of mechanics or effect appear in other legions. We might integrate it slowly, of course, but it's something to be on the lookout for.
Do you think it's possible that it would ever be in a bounty card?
See, the bounty is a difficult thing. The whole concept of bounty itself, neutral cards need to exist in games. They exist in other games as well. But specifically in Legions, aside from obvious point of Marianas being now a playable bounty warlord, and anything that we produce in bounty, we now have to be cognizant of the fact that she can also play it in her deck. But up to that point, bounty has always been a support color and a support faction. So putting something with that potential in bounty, I can see probably would cause a lot of issues, in not necessarily immediately, but in making development of future cards more restrictive, and we don't want to do that. We want to be able to keep our options open. So you probably won't see effect like that appear in bounty, at least for the near future.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
That makes a lot of sense. That Betrayal from Within as a effect, you want to make sure it fits into a given faction, and as soon as you make any sort of effect bounty, it's all of a sudden available to every faction, whether you want it or not.
Exactly.
I do think Betrayal, like specifically, and the Darkwood cards are super incredible flavor and a super cool design, and it definitely would be really sweet to see how those ideas get expanded in the future.
No, I fully agree. The whole reason that I was thinking of this was because of Mountain Distillery. It's an alehouse card. Well, it's a alehouse archetype card, and it's whenever it's blown up, it has a whole bunch of things. Basically, each time a drink is made, each time a drink effect is activated, you place an ale counter on this card. As long as there's 3 or more ale counters on this card face up, on this face-up card, sorry, all face-up Grand Ale Houses cannot be destroyed by opposing players' card effects, and then if this card is destroyed by an opposing player's card effect, you can deal X damage to a target warlord, where X was the amount of ale counters on this card when it was destroyed.
I see, and in a roundabout way, I knew, as you usually do, Matt, you dig for things that benefit the way you play, and
Oh yeah.
so I can tell you that a Distillery was built in to be a built-in protection card to make your opponent make tough choices. We don't want dwarves to make that choice for you. So,
Okay.
so to see an effect like Betrayal from Within appear in dwarves or bounty anytime in the remote future, that would be a hard no.
Gotcha. Sadly, it was worth a try, though.
Mhm.
It was very much worth a try.
Yeah, I would definitely prefer for effects like Betrayal to be locked very specifically, if it does allow us to get a lot more unique sort of hate pieces, like, for example, Distillery as you were talking about, or, say, Seraphim Shatterstar from Angels, where they do have a really cool effect reliant on your opponent's removal and interaction, a way to attack against specific decks. Yeah.
So for those just listening, Seraphim Shatterstar has if this card is discarded from your hand by an opposing player's card effect, you can draw 3 cards. I think this was in response to End of Days.
I would
Well, I mean, End of Days, there's no doubt about it. Our community, anyone that's been around in our community long enough to know that End of Days was a very heavily played tournament piece for fallen angel or fallen demons, and demons have been a consistent meta game deck specifically since the release of Frontiers. So for a better part of a year, demons have seen a heavily amount of competitive play, and as a result have rose to one of the top 4 decks in the game. And a lot of that was to do with not only the addition of Rapture on Mount Bane in Frontiers, which really gave demons the boost that they needed, along with Treasury of the Fallen Priestess, but obviously, of course, the OG Exalted End of Days. So hand hate in any game is a fine line to walk, and End of Days push the limits on that. As time goes on, we always produce counter cards or cards that help curb certain effects or certain power moves of different legions. And yeah, Seraphim Shatterstar for sure was Angels didn't have a direct way to deal with the hand hate that demons provided. So Seraphim Shatterstar was one of those cards that we put in for that otherwise rough demon matchup.
I think it's a great card. Just a small little tech here, little tip. Swipe is technically an opposing player's card effect. So you get to choose what to discard. So if you have Shatterstar in hand and they swipe, you can discard your own Shatterstar if you want to, and then draw 3 more cards.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a card I've been looking for. It's unfortunate that the first effect only works with Seraphim Warriors, but it is interesting if the actual discard effect is powerful enough to combat in the demon matchup.
Exactly.
I am curious if I can ask a rules question real quick. If someone had if you have 2 Seraphim Shatterstars in your hand, and your opponent casts End of Days, and you discard both of them, and you have the triggers, it's, you draw 3 cards. It also has a discard effect where if you have 3 or less cards in your hand, you can pay Bloodborne 15 and eradicate it face up to draw 5 cards. If you discard 2, can you activate the discard effect before the one resolves?
No, because both of them, they would be discarded from your hand simultaneously from End of Days, meaning that you would get both discard triggers first. So you would draw 3 from each one, so you'd have 6 cards in hand, so you wouldn't be able to meet the criteria of the discard effect.
Okay, that makes sense. Still a really powerful way to draw a bunch of cards and have even more refill after the fact.
Oh, exactly. It's
I've seen it happen already since we released Seraphim Shatterstar. It was in a situation where I was actually in a tournament and End of Days was played, and the Angel player had 2. Didn't quite live the dream with 3 Shatterstar in hand, but had 2, and so End of Days made them discard 4 cards in their hand. 2 of them were Shatterstars, and Shatterstars ended up drawing them 3 cards each. So effectively nullifying the End of Days, and now the Demon player ended up paying 25 life just for the Angel player to refill their hand. So
2 more cards.
Exactly. So it was there was a necessary piece for an anti-hand hate style of strategy. We're consistently developing new interactions and new ways to not only combat existing cards as decks fall in and out of favor in the meta, but also just to make sure that we always keep an active and open mind when it comes to design space and design windows for cards. I've said it numerous times, both on the podcast and in person with the people that have seen me or talked to me, even very much so at Gen Con, that we have a tremendous amount of design space in Legions, whether that be card mechanics, individual card effects, or interactions between our left side of the board or cards within our deck. Or archetype specific things, or whether they're Warlord locked or Veil locked or Synergy locked, and there's a lot of interaction and design space there that we don't ever want to make the game too wide. I've mentioned this before. We don't want to make it too broad. We just want to make it deep. We want to have multiple layers to the game where, like you were just talking about earlier on, that you can build Castile in 3 different ways, right? Allowing customization, where the more customizable things and more pieces that are in the game and available, ultimately the more beneficial it becomes for the player. Because as a player coming in, I'm sure Thomas can probably attest to this, that as a player coming in, especially new, and seeing that, like you're saying, there's not really a whole lot of established deck lists. I think part of the reason for that is not just because the game is small and continue growing, but I think it's more so the fact that because each warlord has multiple ways of building a deck. So I think people, even in our community that's been around for 2 years playing the game already, there's just new things you're discovering all the time and new card interactions all the time, that it consistently makes this revolving door, or this consistently editing of deck lists. So there's nothing that's been hammered out or solidified. And I look at that as a developer, and I can't help but smile, because it really shows that the effort that we put into on the design floor, all the way up to producing the card, that we put in the extra effort to make sure that metas don't get stale, and that there's not just a one way to play the deck. That there's multiple ways of making sure that card interactions are ever changing. And we obviously do our best as a company to remove the concept of the best in slot cards. I know it's been a conversation piece and a topic since Gen Con, specifically in our server, our Discord server, about best in slot cards. And I do have to say that a lot of other games, unfortunately, do have that problem of best in slot cards. And what I mean by that saying is that if you are looking for a discard card, or a heavy conscription based card, or something that lets you draw multiple cards, or a big negation spell. Those kind of things. Typically, there's a varying sliding scale of what's good and what's not, or what sees more play and what doesn't. And usually, some sort of power matrix that's put into play that a lot of our competitive players use is, does this help me? Does this give me the value it needs? Do I get additional value out of playing this card? And what is the price point of this card? And I think that when it comes down to looking at best in slot cards in that situation, coming from the mindset of other games coming into Legions, that's very much a thing from other games. That quite simply, this card is better than all other versions that do the similar thing than this card. So therefore, why would I play anything but this one card? And I think that as we grow, we're going to start seeing more and more questions, both to our community and challenging questions to myself about this concept of best in slot. And I know we've ran into that with cards like Twilight Gardens and Void Hollow specifically, about them being bounty negates or bounty disruption cards, and how these would be argued in other games as best in slot cards. So it's hard to say when you're like, oh, is Twilight Gardens the best negate in the game? I would probably say no. And I think the reason why I would say no is because it doesn't, there's some things that just doesn't stop. And there's other things that if it does stop, yeah, it can be perfectly timed, but it's also just a one of in the deck. You can't play multiple copies of it, and it can only be activated once per game. So there's a lot of restrictions on it. So would you say it's best in slot for what it does? I think there's a good arguing point if there's cards in the game that do exactly what Twilight Gardens do, or pretty close to it, but doesn't offer the same limitations. So, and I know that Matt would say for sure that there's cards that are definitely better than Magic Void Hollow.
Oh, 1000%.
So it's a matter of personal opinion. But I know I didn't mean to get on this tangent, but I know we were just talking about these different cards and their interactions, and I feel as though I would say that we've done a pretty decent job at making sure that kind of mentality or concept of best in slot doesn't really exist all that much. I mean, I know, yes, obviously we have our exalteds, but they're exalted not necessarily because they are power pieces in the game, but they're exalted because either they're an important character in the storyline, or they offer a unique mechanic that pertains to their character or their design, or just quite simply because we hired on a really excellent artist, and this art piece came out beautiful, and we wanted to put it in foil, and and we felt as though that it would look great as a piece in an exalted slot, and then we build the card effects pertaining to that. So there's a lot of variables that go into that. But yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that it's just something good to address. Do you guys have any comments or things about that?
Yeah, building off of that, I do. It is I think an inherent inevitability that there will be cards that just outperform others. But I think as you were saying, the fact that they are exalted, that is one thing I have liked about the game, is that there are some very powerful pieces that are, pricier. I do like that they are locked to one, because it means that even that the priciest end of the deck has a hard limit where it's you're gonna be running, you're probably gonna want a Braxis for Shalar, for example, but you only need the one Abraxas. It definitely makes it a lot easier to collect trade. And I think like you were saying about best in slot cards, Twilight I don't think it definitely is not a best count negation spell. I think there are definitely better ones. For example, Denial by Doomfire is an incredibly powerful one out of Empires. It is certainly seen a ton because it is bounty, so inevitably every deck has the opportunity to run it. But I do like that things are actively trying to avoid making a single best card. And a lot of cards that are very powerful are generally locked to one faction, if not one warlord, like with the Exalted, with the Alliance mechanic, for example. I think also, arguably, another example of a best in slot card that gets close is arguably Serena Sada, which one thing I do like about the new 9 warlords is that all of them have a lot more synergy with their Guardian, to where Serena, still being a powerful warlord, of course, doesn't feel like the best one, and in a lot of cases really isn't that great of an option for decks. For example, Castile, you'd much rather have Sacred. So I do like that the game is actively trying to move away from that and trying to avoid having individual cards that just are the best thing to do for what they do.
No, exactly. I fully agree. Like, I think there are arguably some cards that could be deemed as, quote, best in slot, but I think it really comes down to what your deck's trying to do, right? I play a couple decks that run like eradication effects. I don't play them in I don't like I sometimes I won't play Void Hall or Twilight in there because it can mess up the consistency of the deck.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's all about whether you, because sometimes they're great cards when you draw them, but when you don't draw them, it can hurt your consistency a little bit, which is always a interesting battle to face.
Yeah. Like I know, like Grim, for example, with its mill effects, wants to be hitting as many undead and Grim cards as possible, to where running any bounty cards is much more unappealing.
Exactly.
But it definitely does.
Exactly.
Yeah, it definitely does feel like the negate options are definitely a lot more like versatile. Like for Castile, trying to figure out like how many seals, how many Castile favors, for example, should be running that.
No,
For like
exactly.
balance, so that has felt really enjoyable.
Or like simply just thinking of what's another example of one? Like I think ones that are hard to get beat best in slot are like Dismantle. Right? Dismantle and
Mm-hmm.
Seal I choose interchangeably.
Yeah.
But they're very much, I don't know if you agree, Taylor, but I think they're very much always a best in slot for negates. Like not best in
And
slot, but they're
for
go-tos.
sure, and that's honestly, and I would even say that if you wanted to actually go the direction of best in slot, I think that's when it came down to design space. Is that if you're going to argue the point of best in slot negates, I would put Dismantle and Seal Their Fate in that conversation, because honestly, they are probably the best at what they do. But the benefit to them being the best at what they do is that they're uncommon cards.
Yeah.
Right. So
Exactly.
I think the big thing there is that if we're going to travel or traverse into the best in slot category, you're not going to see that on a high end rarity card, because to me that's not favorable for new players coming into the game.
Exactly.
Right? Because then it creates this paywall that I want to try and do my best as a developer, and I try and make sure I listen to the community and have the ear to the ground as much as possible about making sure that the barrier to entry is as small as possible, that players don't feel cheated by a big paywall, and to make sure that if there is best in slot available cards, that they're readily available to the community, and not have anything locked or restricted by scarcity or by expense.
That's another thing I would note on is another thing I did like when I was joining in the game with the like Empire's Kickstarter is that on the Kickstarter for the rewards you had Twilight Gardens and Void Hollow, and that was a really cool thing to see, that you were making these there were high end universally powerful cards in the game, but you were actively doing what you can to put those cards into players' hands and to give them the opportunity. And I think that's a big reason that I did dive, so deep into the game as I have. And that I was like, oh, it's really cool seeing a guaranteed way for me to get important game pieces.
No,
And
I
that they are
agree.
very readily accessible, yeah.
It gives you just this smooth way of like feeling that you're actually able to play the game at a competitive level without having this kind of undertone of it not being fun when you just can't get the pieces you want because they're not accessible to the players.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's one thing. Like, hopefully our effort comes across to the community, and I believe it does to you guys individually and a lot of other members of our community, is the effort we put in and the fact that, high-end cards, your renowns, your exalteds, either they're, like you said, Legion locked or Warlord specific, or even the fact that just the inherent rarity playing a factor in what you can play and what you can't play, in terms of only having two renowns in your deck of the same name and one exalted of the deck in the deck of the same name, is that it's our consistent effort to make sure that these bigger, what you would consider bigger ticket items in other games, in Legions, is not only available, but even if they are harder chase pieces to get, you only need to require one or two of them, depending on which variation or which rarity that you're hunting for, right? And with empires being actively 3 renowns per box, sometimes even 4, the fact of these availability of these cards, we actually were having a discussion the other day about it, that renowns have basically are no longer a chase piece in the game, like they were in the very, very beginning. They've basically just become a shiny upgraded rare, because you get
Mhm.
3 to 4 of them in a booster box now, right? And when you only can play 2 copies of the same name, and in most of the situations the renowns are guardians, which you only need 1 copy anyways. They've become more in abundance, more readily available to players, and as a result has lowered the cost on the secondary market of them, right? And it's a difficult design principle on our part as a company, because we're trying to continually make effective and awesome game pieces, and making these game pieces, like I've stressed before on the podcast, that I still argue the fact that some of our best cards in the game are common, uncommon, and rares. Some situations, commons are some of the most crazily powerful cards in the game, and that's to continually to make the game available to players. And it's hard, because when people come in from other games, their mindset's already programmed to be like, oh, commons are just not useful. We must chase the higher rare cards. And it's almost like we're rewiring the player's mind when it comes to deck building. When we get tournament decks that win our large scale events, and when we had players price out the deck and it's $150 deck that wins a $5,000 tournament, where are you going to find that in any other game, right?
Exactly.
And that's
Oh, yeah.
and that's the big thing that we want to try and do, is that not only battling that whole concept of best in slot, but at the same time making things readily available for everybody. But then as a studio, we're having to consistently design cards with not only the playability and the player in mind and that box opening experience, but also knowing that as the game grows, people are going to inherently price cards at certain values. We as a company can't control that. All we can do is observe it and try to do our best to make sure that cards still maintain playable game pieces while still having collectability without being too scarce, so that players can get the cards, and ultimately the price on those cards are not too high. But they also have to be at the same time high enough to retain and show that the game has value, and that stores can move the product, whether they be singles or sealed products. So it's constantly in our mind frame when it's developing and designing cards. First and foremost, we have to make playable game pieces that fit into the canon of our story, and continue to give people the pieces and the cards that they want to need and play. But also at the same time, making sure that the box opening experience is great for a new player, but also great for the collector. But also at the same time, on top of that, is to make sure that the box and the cards are fair enough, or good enough pull ratios that it provides value for stores to maintain carrying the product. So it's always a delicate balance, and it's a consistent concept in the back of my mind to make sure that we get the best value play wise, but also the best estimated value box wise, to cover the entire ecosystem that is within the card game world.
Yeah, I imagine it definitely has to be a hard sort of line to balance on between trying to appeal to collectors as well as players who are interested in just the competitive side, like people who, do care about the value of their cards, which makes sense. They're a collectible item. You want them to hold value and retain value and to be tradable and all that. And at the same time, there's the idea that you want to put powerful, playable cards into the hands of players so that they can play with them. But I do definitely think that the game has done, from what I've seen from the initial time in it, done a good job of managing the price of decks. I mean, one of the things that interested me in Castile was when, after I had opened my boxes from the Kickstarter, I was, sorting everything out on my desk and I was sorting out the angel cards, and I'm like, oh, well, these Lost Messiah, commons, uncommons, as you were mentioning, were all super interesting, so I just decided to, sort out the Lost Messiah ones. I got Sigrid for my box, and it was, my first try with Castile was, Sigrid was my only card that was renowned or exalted, or renowned or above, and just with commons and uncommons, the deck was incredibly fun, and I don't know that I would have tried the deck out had it not been so interesting just from the commons and uncommons, just from that half of it that I just got playsets from boxes, yeah.
No, and I fully agree. I think, especially in Castile, the renown that you might use. I mean, obviously Imperium Wave. Imperium Wave is very good,
Maybe,
but
yeah.
I think it's important that Helio and Luna aren't required by any means.
I would say the only one that is explicitly required is Sigrid, because she sets up your engine and she gives you another way to burst through damage on turn 3.
Exactly.
But Veritas, Helios, and Luna are all powerful cards, and I'm definitely wanting some number of them in the deck. But even as you mentioned, Empyrean Purification Wave is definitely a super powerful card, but I found myself I'm not playing it. I don't think I want to be playing it right now just because the consume cost of it is too high, to where even the super high-end powerful card for the Warlord isn't required at all to play the deck.
No,
it's a
exactly.
good card, and definitely one that I would look into if certain matchups were a lot more popular, or if I had certain issues that I had to deal with. But for the moment, it's I don't really need a whole bunch of high-end stuff to play the deck. I'd like to run Twilight Gardens and Void Hollow, but they're not necessary, and I think Castile has even better fortified negate.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Controlled by the Chaos Divine. I think it controlled is even notably stronger in the deck than Twilight Gardens is.
Yeah, there's just
So if I
a.
was,
It's very interesting since
if I was ever in a situation where I was wanting to cut my fortified negates in Castile, I would probably start with cutting Twilight Gardens.
Exactly. I think one of the really important things is I only really used Helio Luna to either play it from hand or to double conscript it off of help to get more just recover health.
More Sanctify, yeah. And
but
the recovery.
That was it.
I've liked it because there are a lot of matchups where the effect of your opponents not being able to attack with warriors can be incredibly brutal if you can just stack up enough counters onto your Helios and Luna.
Oh, exactly.
Any Mist Beast, for example, if you can get a Helios and Luna in play with enough counters on it, you turn off a lot of what their deck's going to want to do, and it's very, very hard for them to remove it. So it's a powerful card in matchups, but even then you only really need one of them.
Exactly. It's not it's powerful if it can stay on board, but I feel that Serenity is amazing. Do not get me wrong by any means. Serenity is an amazing keyword. But what's very important is generating the recover 10. Recover 10 is disgusting.
It's a lot.
That's so much. So
it's a
what was it originally supposed to be?
Well, an interesting point about Helios and Luna. Uh, so Helios and Luna was always slotted to be an Empire's card, because it is a Chaos Divine card. But um, we toyed around with it because it was originally going to be a rare. So it has other effects, and when we ultimately made what we consider one of the best decisions we did in Empires was to downshift the warlords. We originally had them in the renowned slot, and we felt as though as playable game pieces, they needed to be more readily available. So we downshifted them into the rares. And when we did that, we needed to and then go through the rare pool and upshift rares into renowns. So we felt that Helios and Luna ultimately, on a face value, was not necessarily deserving the upshift to the renown, but it was a very important character in our storyline. We really wanted to capitalize on what those characters were going to be going forward in the future. But also, Emmanuel Bull-Roden, one of our premier artists, did an excellent job on the artwork for Helios and Luna. So we felt as though that his artwork, along with the importance of the actual character itself, deemed it worthy enough to get the upshift and put it into foil. So that's the decision we did. And as we moved it up into Renown, we had to readjust and recalibrate some of its effects, given the fact that it now was a 2 of only in the deck instead of 3. So we could give it a little bit more of a power upshift, even though Renowns are still, like I said, readily available in the box for Empires. We wanted to make sure that it was deemed worthy enough to be a Renown at that point. So it got the upgrade from a Renown, from a Recover 5 into a Recover 10. We felt that was a really good upshift for the deck, and a good upshift for that card, just because it offered this great ability of the art depicts 2 characters on it. So what better than to basically have each character represent 5 health, right? So we felt that was a very thematic and very flavorful to do it that way. Serenity was always the plan for it, because they are the Chaos Divine lovers, but and then attaching Sanctify to it as well was just thematic in its own right. And having these 2 lovers not only prevent attacking of warriors, but also being able to protect themselves while they were in this state of bliss, just seemed appropriate.
Mm-hmm. I'm very happy to hear. I'm very happy that the warlords from Empires were moved down to rare, because they definitely shouldn't be common or uncommon, because you don't need more than one of them, but it's good to have them in the hands of players as sort of the first piece to any deck you want to build,
Exactly, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And as right now, as we're working our way and very actively finishing up Opus of the Magi right now in terms of design, it's actually going to be going into our testers' hands very shortly. Tidbits of information I can give about Opus of Magi. So one of the great things about the podcast and having me on here is the fact that the people who listen to it get little spoilers or little hints. And Thomas, being a new player and is always interested in building new decks, and Matt himself loves to build new decks, I can tell you guys, you'd be the first ones to hear that Opus the Magi is not only going to have great mechanics and new things obviously coming, as you guys are expecting, but Opus will, at least right now in the design window, things are always subject to change, but at least right now, Opus is slotted to add 2 more warlords to the game. So, so if everything stays according to plan, there will be 2 additional warlords being added to the game in Opus. So, I'll let you guys speculate which warlords or which legions will be getting those 2 warlords, or each warlord. But yeah, it's definitely something that we introduced 8 in Empires. We know for a fact we're never going to do 8 again in a single set. It's just incrementally too hard to balance and test continuously. Obviously, as the card pool gets bigger and the sets exponentially compound. But implementing warlords highlighting on certain legions as sets come out. I think that'll be really cool, and it's going to continue to add variability and deck building potential, specifically for new players coming in. And say a new player comes in and Opus is the first set they buy, and or it's the set that brings them into the game, and I want them to be able to access getting warlords in that set as well. So even if it's just 2 of them.
Oh, I fully agree.
That is, yeah, super exciting. I'm definitely curious
tell
to
me
see what
your,
legions will.
You really want to make my day. Please tell me you're giving me Kaltor.
I was gonna say, yeah, I'm really curious to see what legions will get the warlords, because there's definitely, like, as Taylor has mentioned in the past in conversation, archetypes have been pushed for different legions and different, for example, empires gave a lot of the original warlords their final pieces, and it is really cool to see how different archetypes are evolving. So it's interesting to see which archetypes will be like fully fleshed out with the release of Opus then, and given a dedicated warlord. Yeah.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, and that's something we really want to focus on, because like Thomas highlighted there, and it's important for new players coming in to know it too, is that Empires on the Rise finished our, for lack of better words, our first year block. I know it's a set that was released in year 2, but it finished our first block of sets that were highlighting and focusing around the original 8 warlords of the storyline. So although those warlords are still readily available, excellent game pieces, and still some of the best decks in the game, we finalized for the most part what their decks are going to do. Other sets will always give them future support in the future, but the big thing is that Empires was the launching point for the 8 new warlords, and so Opus will be the first set released post Empires that is going to be specifically tailored to those 8 new warlords and giving them further support to bring them to a different level. Doesn't mean that, like Thomas is already a full example of making Castile already on the level of some of the 8, if not all of the 8 original warlords. But I'm sure he's excited the fact that Castile will also be getting support in Opus the Magi to give him an even more power chance, and maybe something that's going to help him combat the combo or the destructiveness of dwarves, perhaps. But no, yeah, of course, we in Empires we also sneakily hid in some archetypes that not only that we built off of from Frontiers, but also into Empires. There's some things that are hidden in there, whether they're flavor text or hidden pieces in the artwork, or just 1 or 2 off cards. Like Mythical Beast got 3 Djinn cards out of nowhere in Empire. So, does that something that we build off of going forward? So it's things like that we're really trying to hone in on. And so Opus the Magi you're gonna see, a good solid 70-80% of the set is going to be dedicated to the 8 new warlords, but there's always that 20 to 30% that is either going to be some generic support, or perhaps continued archetype support, or in this situation 2 brand new warlords.
Well, of course, and you want it to be specific, but if it's too specific, then it's too niche, right? There's a fine line to tread, as there is everything.
Exactly. But sorry, Matt, don't mean to burst your bubble, but there's no Kaltor's not coming in Opus.
I know.
It's just not thematically the set for him.
Sure, it is.
It is interesting with dwarves that right now with Quartz Heart there's Frost Control and Blast Forge, but Quartz Heart technically isn't the intended warlord for either of those decks eventually, right?
Correct. Yes. Of course. That's the dwarves are the most enigma out of all of them, because Ethel is clearly defined that she is the Alehouse warlord, but Quartz Heart the Arcane Rune Master, and he doesn't even actually have his deck yet. That's the crazy part, is that Quartz Heart is not the Frost Control deck, or the Frost Control warlord, or the Blast Forge warlord. So What does that mean for Quartz Art in the future? Perhaps you start getting pieces of his deck down the road.
I think we have one of them, which is Runecast Reverberation.
True, we do have Runecast Reverberation that's locked at Quartz Art himself, but as you can probably tell, he's the Arcane Rune Master and Runecast Reverberation. So you can probably see that a little bit of the direction in which the cards are going. I mean, Quartz Art's ability is called Casting the Runes. So, and in Opus of the Magi, we're introducing the new runic rares too, right? So there's some theme coming. So there's a lot of moving pieces, especially since Raylene is Quartz Heart's guardian. So when we expand further, we have Opus the Magi, and then we're going to follow it up with Masquerade of the Macabre. And then there's on the website we have an undisclosed set after that is still to be announced, but it may or may not be dwarf themed. So
Interesting.
It should be.
I'd be happy.
Super exciting.
Cheers.
I'm definitely curious what. Mechanically, I'm gonna guess part of what he will be focusing on will be top deck manipulation in that sort of area, from what the related curves to him. And I mean, a lot of dwarf decks do have effects that care about manipulating the top of your deck or when they're milled from the top of your deck. So I'm excited to see how that gets built into and expanded on.
Yeah, there's some interesting things coming for sure. I mean, Empires is our newest set, and still very much meta's being hammered out for it. But my focus now has been 100% on Opus of the Magi and in the direction in which Opus is propelling the game. And for our invested players that listen and watch the podcast and are either competitive, much like Thomas, and really into deck building like Matt is that Opus the Magi is going to be providing some really interesting mechanics, a really interesting design space, and we're really bringing Legions back to the basics with Opus. There's a lot of very refined card effects. There's a lot of very direct card effects, things that interact with specific things, and we're going to walk a fine line of whether they're going to be a niche interaction or not, but I think there's going to be definitely highly playable pieces, a lot of generic support across the board for all the Legions. And, coming out of Empires, which had no bounty cards in it, I mean, outside of our reprints of the campaign drops, and then, of course, the bounty hunter cards that we slotted in for the Kickstarter specifically to support Mariana's in its early days. But we're going to be reintroducing some more bounty cards into Opus the Magi as well, including 3 bounty exalteds coming in Opus the Magi. So one being slotted in the box topper, as people know or have seen on our website thus far, is that there are 9 exalted box toppers that are going to be specific algorithm dropped box toppers. But there's actually one for each Legion, yep, as well as the 11 Grand Opus cards will be box toppers as well. So those are going to be the lore-based, story-driven pieces. But we are also introducing 2 main set exalted specifically for the Bounty Legion. So it's going to be really cool. Opus is also going to introduce cards the first time that are not 100% designed by myself. So we're going to have some cards that are not only one exalted in the set is actually going to be designed by one of our community members, Trey. He's going to be working with me personally on it because it's part of his prize that he got for redeeming golden ticket number 5 out of Empires on the Rise. So there's going to be one exalted that he's going to be working with me on and an artist on to design both the artwork and the game mechanics for that specific card, which will be included in Opus the Magi, which is going to be really cool to have a community member have input on the card game directly. But also like I said, so Opus is going to feature some other cards that were not solely designed by me. It's gonna introduce some cards that we brought Ryan in to help design some pieces. So it's going to be really cool to have. But yeah, there's a lot to look forward to in that set, and it's going to be our biggest one yet. It's going to be a lot of lore pieces, a lot of really cool things, but also for the players that are super competitive, I will tell you that Opus is going to be introducing some interesting disruption mechanics. We'll say that for anyone that enters into tournament play, you'll see that, or see in tournament play, that there's a lot of decks that are relying on certain cards, or decks that are more combo based, or decks that put together complex play lines. And Opus is going to offer some disruption pieces in a large way to some of those combo driven decks. So we are definitely going to find a way to once again put the game on its head. So
that is incredibly exciting. I'm excited about the cards designed by Ryan. I know he was working on cards for a set after Opus. I didn't know he had a few cards that were going to end up in the set, so I'm excited to see how those turn out.
The reason why I mentioned that, because specifically there is a one of the 2 Exalted Bounty cards was actually Ryan's design, and I've worked with him on making sure it's tweaked and obviously fair, but it is a card designed by Ryan, so you're sure there's going to be definitely some shenanigans ensuing, that's for sure.
Oh yeah. If I can jump to a slightly different topic, one
For sure.
other recent development that's recently got a few changes is the watch list, which has been very interesting to keep an eye on. That's been another thing of a newer player to the competitive scene that is very nice to see, is the watch list and the care in that. And I know the first update was posted, and then a bit later someone was talking to me at Nerds about the watch list, and I didn't even realize it had been updated that day. I was like, oh, it's been updated again. So it's really sweet to see the constant updates on that front to really sort of clarify, how you're looking at the meta as it is evolving, how you're looking at, new decks and old decks alike, how new cards and old cards and how they've been changed by, the release of certain cards. Like, for example, Prism as a card is a lot more worrisome now that Esmeralda exists, so the card that, loops with it. Cards like Acceleration that have been made a lot stronger by the new Warlords and all of that. So it's been really sweet to see the sort of high level of attention in that area. I know a lot of players have complained in different card games about, with the meta, with it feeling stale, with, it feels like the company's not really paying attention. So it is really nice to see sort of the diligence in trying to point out, what sort of cards and decks are maybe worrisome, for what reasons, how you might look at trying to reduce the power levels, or, some of that. So it has been really nice to see the very frequent updates on that, frankly.
Well, yeah, I was going to comment on that. I was going to get your perspective, Thomas, on, coming from other games, and obviously whether the games that have rotation or games that have ban lists and stuff like that. How, as a new player, your approach, or your see of our approach towards keeping a pulse on the meta, keeping having available watch list that's updated frequently, that how is that perspective as a new player coming in? Is it good knowing that, in terms of like, hey, we're watching this, we're keeping an eye on it? Is it something that not just for players that want to retain value in their cards, like, hey, this card's on the watch list, so maybe it gets restricted or limited, or even the odd chance that it might get suspended? How would that impact the actual value of the card? Or things could work the other way. Maybe cards come off the restricted list or whatever it may be. How is that perspective of a new player in that situation?
I mean, I think, yeah, like I was saying, I'm a big fan of it. I like that you're very transparent with that you are, you are actively looking at the, the meta and how decks are evolving, and you are pointing out, like, okay, these things might need to change. I do like that I like the system of restriction to where you can more, in a game where it's just like a straight up ban on a card, you just, go from, say 4 copies to 0, having the ability to go, okay, we're going to limit this card to 2 copies to limit its consistency. I think that gives a lot more opportunity to sort of more aggressively chip away at things that are proving problematic or too strong or too, maybe they lead to unfun play experiences. So I do like that there is an opportunity for being a little more detailed with, like, okay, we're going to go from 3 to 2 to this, so it's less consistent. We're going to hit this one a little bit so that it's, the deck's overall less powerful.
No,
and some card that's like, yeah, this one is just going to lead to more problems in the future. It's just going to have to go, the worst case scenario.
exactly.
I'm the player. I'm less on the side of, you're saying collecting, so I don't quite have that perspective. But as a competitive player, it's nice to see that you are actively monitoring this and actively willing to, take chips before it becomes a slog and a problem and something that like drags on.
No, exactly. And I think it's something that's very important, since it gives more of a finite and it gives more of a variable answer instead of just yes or no.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Yes or no
I think it
makes it difficult.
A big thing we wanted to stress to our, especially our playing community, because like honestly, without our playing community, the game doesn't exist, right? So the community that are actively playing, whether it's casual or competitive, obviously this impacts the competitive players the most, is the fact that our promise as a company that nothing will appear on a restricted or limited list without it priorly showing up on the watch list. So that way players going in, competitive players, understand that the watch list is continually updated throughout the ever-shifting metagame, but they'll know that these are the cards that the company is specifically looking at, and we won't get blindsided by a card that's not on this list.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an active watch that is public, and people can see, like, hey, this is what they're looking at. We're not going to get hit with something out of the blue. And then the players, they'll have them up, it'll be up there, and it's ever changing, and it'll be up there, and people can say, like, okay, we see what the company's talking about here, or we see it in the past couple of meta decks perhaps, or like we can keep the pulse on it with the company and follow along and be like, okay, well, then if one of the cards in my deck, for instance, is on this list, is there a reason why it's on this list? Do I see the reasoning behind it? And if it does have to be changed, limited, restricted, whatever it may be, how is that going to impact my game? And therefore, do I have pieces to replace it ready to go if that does change?
Mm-hmm. Which, yeah, even more so than the actual game effects of a card being banned or restricted, the communication and transparency is great to know that, it's reassuring that, yeah, you are looking at the meta, you are, paying attention to specifically what parts of decks are, concerning, specifically what parts are potentially too strong or too consistent. And so regardless of any actual action taken in banning or restricting a card, at least having the assurance that I am looking at this, we will be paying attention to it possibly becoming a problem. Maybe it's a problem now, maybe it's just something that is concerning and might be too strong in the future. The communication on that is fantastic, yeah.
So, as a new player, I wanted to comment and highlight on this, but before obviously our podcast concludes, I wanted to bring in the fact that so for those who've listened this far, I mean, maybe we should have started with this, but we like to jump right into talking about cards and effects and what's going on. But Thomas is a player who joined us via a university play group. And I think this is really important to bring up, is the fact that as we're coming now into the fall, August is concluding. Everyone's, next weekend, or this coming weekend, everyone's going to be going into residences and returning to the college and university towns. And that's honestly where we see the biggest influx of players. People are coming back from their summer vacation. Everyone's moving back into these university towns, and some of our game stores and local play groups in those towns benefit greatly from the influx of new individuals coming back. And Thomas being one of them that discovered the game through a learn to play night at Laurier University in Kitchener-Waterloo. It's a great opportunity for new players to get, or for new people to come in, and whether it's on Frosh Week or throughout the school year, if you're maybe not a party goer, or one that does like the nerdier world or the aspect of playing games with friends, Allegiance offers great experience in that regard. And talk to your community about it. Talk to your friends about it. Maybe run a learn to play event at your college university. I think Thomas can attest to it. That's how he got into the game. Do you have anything that you want to add to that, Tom?
If I know one of the on the Laurier Discord server, someone did mention trading card game nights and events, so I certainly will be shouting out and mentioning Legions if Hunter haven't already done so, which would be sweet to see that happen, especially because card store Atlas is so close to Laurier, and does make for a great play area. I'm excited actually for school, because I'll stop work and I'll actually be able to make it to Wednesday night play nights at Atlas. But it'll definitely be sweet to see if more players from Laurier would be interested in joining. I know there was definitely a turnout for the event itself, so it'll be if more players might try again, newer players might join in, people going into their first year, for example. It'd be great to spread the game through that axis.
Yeah, I think that's important, because it's a big icebreaker especially for, like you said, those first year university college students are coming in, and maybe they're moving to a different city for far away from home, or they're not necessarily going to a school with the friends they went to high school and stuff with. I think that's a really good entry point to not only getting involved in some of the clubs or programs at your school, but also getting to know people, right? It's a great icebreaker. Some of my best friends are from people I met playing cards years and years ago, right? So, if Legions can be a medium to bring people together from different walks of life or from different locations because they're attending the same school, it maybe builds lifelong friendships while also simultaneously growing the game, right? I think that's a huge win for college university towns. I know Cody, who is the owner of Booster House and boosterhouse.ca in Kingston, Ontario. I know him and I have been talking pretty closely about the fact that Kingston is home to 3 college universities, and every year this time of year they see a massive influx of new people coming into the city, and it's already starting to show in his area that he's picking up new players coming out to play Legions of the Legion. Because they're coming into the area and they're looking for something to do, and being a college university student, and that the game is very cheap to get into, so it's really good on the pocketbook of broke college university students. That allows them to pass the time effectively, or like I said, meet friends and kind of break that ice in a low cost entry point. So that's where if we can continue to push that growth through the fall because of college universities, I think that's crucial. Gen Con really helped us with that, and I think we can piggyback off of that and move forward. And that's why we host our bigger end or higher end tournaments, like our Siege series is coming up this fall, right? We have a Nerds Battle for Glory coming up September 9th. Saturday, September 9th. Feel free to come by Nerds. It's free entry to Nerds Cafe in Woodstock, Ontario to play. But as a kind of a get your feet wet kind of tournament to get ready for potentially going further into like Siege Series and to further competitive play in Legions. Or if you're a new player, come by and learn the game. I know that we have Saturday, October 14th is the Kingston Siege Series. It's going to be, we're bringing back the Siege Series now, and it'll be a $3,000 prize pool. I believe it's $16 to sign up through boosterhouse.ca or $20 entry at the door. All proceeds go to Booster House and Cody for putting on the event and being an awesome retailer for us in Kingston. But it's going to be up to $3,000 worth of prize support. Plus, we have side events going on. I think there's also booths with comic book vendors and such as well, arts and crafts and bake sales and stuff like that. So it's going to be like almost like the makings of an early Legions con. I know Cody and I are working on potentially starting up our own con out that way as well. So I think that'll be really cool. And then of course we're working with Comic Fusion, one of our game stores in Flemington, New Jersey, to put on a Siege Series this fall as well in New Jersey. So and then coming back to November 25th, it's the last Saturday of November. We're back doing a Siege Series at Nerds Cafe in Woodstock. So these are awesome events. They're cheap to enter in, and you can have a chance of winning great prizes. Pricing goes all the way down to top 16. Top 8 get a regional tournament invite that allows them access or grants them access to the next level of competition as well. So, you know, we're building out our organized play network even more, capitalizing off of the Siege Series we did at the end of last year. And we're just building towards our Rally the Realms regional tournament that we're going to be holding this coming year. So, and obviously these events are open to both Canadian and American players. I know we have American players that got into the game at Gen Con that are going to be coming up and attending the Siege Series in Kingston. So that's awesome to see them coming to Canada to play the game as well. So that kind of growth, coupled with we're talking about that growth through the college universities, I think that's huge. Thomas, you're going to be competing in your first Siege Series coming up, right? How do you feel about this?
I'm very excited to compete. I've in other card games, I've gone to events. I'm very excited for Kingston. There's another whole half of the community, so it's even part just the meet and greet aspect of it, of being able to meet a whole bunch of people who I've seen on the Discord but haven't had the chance to interact with yet. So it's really sweet to be able to meet with them, and I'm also excited to really delve into the full competitive environment of Legions post-Empire with the number of warlords more than doubling. It's going to be a really wide open competitive scene. I think it's going to be really exciting to see how it goes. Again, the deck I'm going with definitely has some more polarizing matchups, so it'll definitely be interesting to see which ones I run into, but overall, I'm definitely really excited for it. It sounds like a ton of work is being put in setting it all up and making it a great experience, which, frankly, it's if there were no side events and the prize pool was tiny, I'd probably still go for the chance to compete in the high-end competitive event. So it's going to be very exciting for that. And I can't wait for the 14th.
No, exactly.
Yeah,
I think it's going to be so exciting.
I can't give Cody a shout out enough. The work that he's put in the past 4 or 5 months for Legions, building a community player base of 20 to 24 players in the Kingston area, and that are just only growing now. That mostly a casual scene, but we do have some diehard competitive players in that area as well, and that's why our focus, and mainly his focus as he's putting on this whole event. He went to the effort of renting a hall. He's got catering services set up. He's got live music set up. Like it's the extreme lengths that he's going to set the bar for some of these events is amazing to see that effort put in by a retailer. And so we're going to back them 100% as a company, bringing in, and we're supplying all the prize support for the event. With the tournament software to run everything, so that he can focus on just being the host, and we can run the event. So just the effort and such he's putting in, like access to food and and drink there, as well as other things for sale and side events. He really wants to make it an experience, not just a tournament. And that's the kind of direction and the drive that we need from our community members and from our stores alike, because that's what sells the game. That's what pushes the game. That's what allows us to have the growth that we have. And ultimately, who doesn't want to come out and have a fun time, right? Especially as the summer's concluding and we get into fall, and inevitably the cold, harsh winter of Canada starts to set in. Let's coming off of entering into October and coming off the backs of Thanksgiving here in Canada, and being able to have a fun time with hang out with friends and still compete for awesome prizes and the chance to move on and higher level tournaments beyond that as well. I think that's it. He's definitely going to be setting a precedence for Siege Series going forward, and hopefully we get that same output from other retailers to really give us the opportunity to excel as not just a game but an experience.
Mm-hmm.
No, and I fully agree. And I think with that, if you guys are okay with it, I think that's a perfect place to end it here.
Yeah, I think that sounds good to me. It's been
We had some great words.
Great
at the very
conversation.
end, so some wise words by Taylor. Always a great place to end things.
Yeah, I think that'll be great going forward, and it's been great to have Thomas on. Hopefully we can have him come back on, maybe either before or even after the Siege series, to kind of get a recap on how a relatively new player bringing a very tuned deck turned out at the Siege series, and maybe the next time we have him on, he'll have a tournament invite to flaunt.
Absolutely, yeah. Anytime it'd be super sweet to just have a full hour and a half just diving right into the competitive scene and all the decks and what they're doing and how it all interacts. It'd be sweet to do that in the future, yeah.
No, exactly, and I fully agree, and we'd love to have you back, Thomas.
Yeah, it's been thank you for inviting me in the first place. I was very pleasantly surprised to see the invitation, and really happy you decided to bring me on.
Like I said, next time we bring you in, for sure. It was awesome to have you on. I think we definitely bring you in to have that competitive player aspect, and coming to your first major event and getting that kind of feedback on the podcast. I mean, we've had collectors on here, we've had retailers on here, we've had people who are supporting both Canada and the United States. So I think it'll be cool to have that competitive player on here, and especially being someone who's attending their first Legions event, so kind of get that feedback of what your first impressions were on how events are held in this game and compared to others, and of course, how you fared in the competitive world.
And yeah, like you said, hopefully I'll have a invitation by that point to put some sort of validity behind my statements, but we'll see how it goes. I'm excited either way.
We're excited to have you, man. It is very exciting, and with that, I think we will call it here for now. It has been amazing, and I hope that you guys all have a great rest of your day whenever you're listening to this. And thank you again, Thomas. Thank you, Taylor, as always. And we'll see you next time in the lounge.
Later, guys.